There's a malware loose right now that wipes your entire computer the moment you try to remove it. Trying to lock it out is what sets it off. It reached thousands of machines hidden inside software those people already trusted, and I told you this exact attack was coming back in January. Hi nerds, I'm Addie. Today, I'm taking you inside the anatomy of this thing. How one poison package spreads to thousands, why it's named after a monster from Dune, and what you can actually do about it. The newest version rewrote the rules, and most of the advice you're hearing would not have stopped it. Let's get into it. The receipt. Back in January, I told you that the NPM compromise from late 2025 wasn't a one-off, that incidents like it would stop being treated as freak accidents and become the baseline risk, and that attackers were shifting away from big vendors and toward the exhausted, underpaid, often single maintainers who hold up the whole stack. The NPM compromise made that crystal clear. 19 packages were affected, and they were serving more than 2.6 billion downloads per week. And no single organization had visibility into the full dependency chain. That was the prediction. Here's the scoreboard 5 months later. Between September of 2025 and this month, the NPM ecosystem has been hit by a series of self-replicating worms, each one larger than the last, and the most recent one landed on the 12th of May. So the obvious question is, I could see this coming in January, and I'm just one person with a camera, why did the people who run the world's most important software registry not stop it? What a supply chain attack actually is. You likely didn't write most of your own software. Neither did the company that built the app you're watching this on. When a developer builds an app, they pull in pre-built building blocks called packages, which are little libraries of code that already solve a common problem, so they don't have to reinvent it. They have one package for handling dates, one for colors in the terminal, and one for talking to a database. This is normal. It's basically how everything gets built, and it's the only reason software ships as quickly as it does. But the catch is that each of those packages was written by some other person, and each of those packages pulls in packages of its own, which pull in more, and so on down the line. A single modern web app can easily depend on 1,000 or more of these building blocks. The developer chose maybe 20 of them on purpose, but the other 980 came along for the ride, written by people whose names they will never know. Now, look at what you actually agreed to when you installed that software. You agreed to trust all 1,000, plus anyone who can trick, phish, or hack any one of those 1,000. Trust in software is transitive. So let's throw it back to math class. It passes from one package to the next without asking you, and there's no upper limit on how far it can spread. And it's worse than just reading code because of one specific feature. When you install a package, that package is allowed to run commands on your machine during the installation itself, before you've used it for anything. It's called an install script, and it exists for legitimate reasons. It also means a poison package doesn't have to wait for you to even run it. It'll just run the second it arrives. So, a supply chain attack is simple to state. Instead of attacking you directly, the attacker poisons one of those 1,000 building blocks that you and millions of other people already trust. Then they let your own trust deliver the payload. The question is, who would weaponize something like this? The worm has a name. The worm eating NPM right now is called Shai-Hulud. In Frank Herbert's Dune, Shai-Hulud is the name the desert people give to the giant sandworms, which are the monsters that move underneath the sand and swallow everything on the surface. The attackers chose that name on purpose. When the worm steals your credentials, it posts them into a public repository, and OneWave literally labels itself Shai-Hulud, the second coming. That name has a reason. The book I just finished, also called Sandworm, is about a unit of Russian military intelligence hackers who earned that name in 2014 when researchers found references to Dune buried in their malware, including a string that just said Arrakis 02, the name of a place on the worm planet. They reference the same novel and desert, but it's different hackers separated by more than a decade. Now, to be clear, these aren't the same people. The group in the book is a nation state, the GRU, doing geopolitical sabotage, and the NPM worm is a criminal operation chasing credentials and cryptocurrency. So nobody's claiming that the Russian intelligence is behind your broken build. What they share is the mythology, because Dune runs deep in hacker culture, and two different monsters ended up with the same name. But there's also a deeper connection. The single most destructive cyber attack in history is the centerpiece of that book. It's called NotPetya. In 2017, it caused around $10 billion in damage. It shut down the largest shipping company on Earth, and it even knocked out the radiation monitoring at Chernobyl site. And here's how NotPetya started. It began with a poisoned update to a piece of Ukrainian accounting software that nearly every business in the country was required to run. The attackers compromised one trusted update and let the trust carry the weapon everywhere. That is the same move. Poison a channel that people are required to trust, then let the trust do the spreading. The worm in your code today and the worm in that book are not the same hackers, but they are the same weapon, and they even share the same name. So let me take you inside the newest one and show you exactly how it works. The anatomy of the worm. The version that landed on May 12th is the one I want to dissect because it has 5 stages, and each one is worse than the one before it. Researchers are calling it mini Shai-Hulud, and by the time you watch this, it had hit more than 160 packages, including ones from Tanstack, Mistral AI, and UiPath, and the count kept climbing because that's what worms do. Stage 1. The fork. The attacker copied a popular open source project, opened what looked like a normal contribution to it, and used a weakness in the project's automated build system to quietly poison the build environment. There was nothing visible to the maintainer. The trap just sat in the machinery waiting for the next release. Stage 2. The forged trust. After the last round of worms, the entire industry rallied around a fix called provenance. The idea is a cryptographic stamp on every package that proves it was really built by the real project on the real build system from the real source code. It's a good idea in theory, so the attackers reached into the build system's memory, stole those credentials that issue the stamp, and published their poison package with a completely valid provenance stamp on it. The seal of authenticity said genuine because the attacker was now standing inside of the factory, and that fix became their disguise. Stage 3. The harvest. The moment that package installs on a developer's machine or a build server, it goes hunting for secrets. Its treasure is GitHub tokens, npm tokens, Amazon Cloud Keys, Google and Microsoft Cloud Keys, Kubernetes credentials, and the access tokens for HashiCorp Vault, which is the tool companies use specifically to guard their other secrets. It scoops up everything and ships it out. Stage 4. The spread. Using the credentials it just stole, it finds every package that this victim had permission to publish, injects a copy of itself into each one, bumps the version number, and pushes the poison versions back out to the world. Every developer it infects becomes the launch point for the next wave. It simply propagates on its own, and it gets worse from there. And the last stage is the one I had never seen before. Stage 5. The dead man switch. The worm installs a quiet background process that wakes up every 60 seconds and checks whether its stolen access still works. As long as you leave it alone, it will behave. But the instant you do the responsible thing by spotting the breach and revoking the token, it reads that as the end and fires off one command, rm-rf. Pointed straight at your home directory. Once it runs, nothing comes back. It takes every file, photo, and project with it. You may recognize this command because it's very close to the one that tech edgelords love to feed beginners, except they point theirs at the root of the whole system and take the entire machine down with it. Somehow, the worm is the more polite version here. Cleaning up the infection is the exact thing that triggers the bomb, and 24 hours later, it quietly deletes itself, so the evidence of how it even got there goes with it. It goes through 5 stages: steal, disguise, harvest, spread, and finally destroy. So is this a freak event or a 1 in a million chain of bad luck? It keeps coming back. This is the 4th major version of this worm in about 8 months, and the timeline tells the whole story. September 2025, the first self-replicating NPM worm appears, hits a couple hundred packages, and uses an automated secret scanning tool to vacuum up credentials. A few weeks later, the US government's own cyber agency puts out a formal alert. November 2025, 2025, it comes back bigger. This wave hits nearly 800 packages and over 1,000 versions and spins up more than 25,000 malicious repositories. The attackers name this one, in their own terms, the second coming. Spring 2026. It splits and mutates, learning to spread across more than one software ecosystem at once. And then May, the version we just dissected, the one that forges the industry's own fix and ships a self-destruct. After the September worm, the industry did respond with provenance stamps, stronger publishing controls, and better defaults. This was real work by serious people, and the May worm walked straight through all of it by stealing the keys to the machine that issues it. Every defensive layer that gets built becomes the next thing the worm learns to wear. So if the registry can't fully stop this, and the cryptography can't fully stop this, you'd think nobody saw it coming. But people did see it coming, and they were saying so for years. So let me tell you who they are. The people who warned us. There's a small group of people who've been saying don't blindly trust the package registry since long before any of this ever hit the news, and they were treated as paranoid for it. Feroz Abu Khadija built an entire company, Socket, on the bet that install time code from strangers is a soft underbelly of modern software. The whole premise was that you should inspect what runs when you install, not just what runs when you ship. Nicole Pearl Roth, whose book I will link below, spent years documenting how the most critical software on Earth is often held together by one or two exhausted, unpaid volunteers, which is exactly the type of maintainer that attackers now target first. And then there's Mitchell Hashimoto. If you're a developer, you know the name. He co-founded HashiCorp and created Terraform, tools that basically run modern cloud infrastructure. And his argument, especially in the project he's building now, is almost monk-like in its discipline. Depend on as little outside code as humanly possible. And when you do depend on something, vendor it, meaning take a frozen copy you control instead of pulling a fresh one from the internet on every build. His newest library is deliberately built to have zero outside dependencies at all. The May worm specifically steals HashiCorp vault tokens. So yes, that means the man who built the tool companies use to protect their secrets has spent the last 2 years quietly arguing for the one philosophy that blunts this entire class of attack. The honest catch, and I won't pretend otherwise, is that vendoring means you stop getting automatic security updates, so it's a real trade-off, not necessarily a magic wand. Which brings us to what you should actually do. If you write code, this part is for you specifically. And if you don't, this is the checklist to send whoever does, because every app you use was built by someone who needs to hear it. The single highest leverage change is one line. Turn off install scripts by default. In your project config, you set ignore scripts to true, and you cut off the most common path these worms use, the code that runs the instant a package arrives. Most of your dependencies don't need it, and you can allow the few that genuinely do one at a time on purpose. Second, add a cooldown period. Tell your installer to refuse any package version published in the last few days. Almost every one of these worms gets caught within hours to days, so a short waiting period means the community finds the poison before it ever reaches your machine, at basically no cost to you. Third, in your build pipelines, use the strict install command that follows your locked list of versions exactly instead of the loose one that's allowed to grab whatever's newest. That one swap closes the door on a surprise poison version sliding through a loose version range. Fourth, turn on trusted publishing and provenance if you maintain packages. The catch, and the Mayworm proved it, is that provenance only tells you where a build came from. It doesn't tell you that the build is clean. If the factory itself is compromised, the stamp lies. It's necessary, and it's also not really sufficient, so use it, but don't treat it as a force field. Fifth, the Hashimoto move. Audit how many dependencies you actually have, cut the ones you don't need, and for the critical ones, consider vendoring a copy that you control. Fewer doors means there's fewer locks to pick. You can see this on your own machine next time you sit down to work. Open the project you care about most and check one thing: whether install scripts are turned off. If you don't write code, your version of that check is even simpler. Look at the app you open the most and find its update setting. It's almost certainly updating on its own, which means you have already agreed to trust whoever builds it completely on every release forever. Most people never made that decision consciously. Trust in software is usually a default you inherited rather than a choice you made, and the move here is to start choosing it on purpose. Of course, software updates are extremely important for security updates and bug fixes, so just use some discernment. So the worm in your code and the worm in the book were never the same hackers, but they understood the same truth that the fastest way into a fortress is to ride on something the fortress already trusts. Shai-Hulud will be back. It already announced its own second coming. You cannot kill the worm, so the work is to build systems that survive it. Assume the bite is coming, and make sure it can't take everything when it lands. If you like this video about the anatomy of an NPM worm, then you'll love this one about whether passkeys are actually safe. I'll see you in that video next.